I'm Dr. Bill Cordua. I'm a geology professor at the University of Wisconsin at River Falls. When you talk to geologists, many times will tell you that there was a large mountain range going across the central part of the state. But as you look at Wisconsin today, you really don't see that in the topography we have now, which is sort of flat. So what's the evidence for this outrageous statement? Well, it turns out the evidence for that are in these rocks, which now are used as landscape boulders around the Agricultural Science Hall in the University of Wisconsin campus. These boulders come from a quarry near Neillsville, Wisconsin. Geologists love quarries because they expose rocks that are usually buried under younger strata, especially glacial drift in this part of the world. This quarry, while producing crushed stone, riprap, and other products, exposed a fantastic section of rocks. Geologists have mapped a belt of this rock across the center of the state, but in few places is it as well exposed as here. You can see what beautiful rocks they are. Even non-geologists are impressed. When I was studying these rocks, I found out I liked them so well that I had a number of boulders of them delivered to campus, not only to serve as decorative rocks, but also to serve as teaching tools for our geology students. The quarry owners were nice enough to allow me and my students access to do our research. Quarries are dangerous places and should never be entered without permission and the proper safety gear and precautions. We spent a lot of time making observations and measurements and collecting samples for further study in the lab. So what did we discover? Most of these rocks are what we call metamorphic. That is, that they were sedimentary or volcanic rocks that at one point of their history were buried and transformed by temperatures and pressures, which formed new minerals and new structures. Some of the evidence for high temperature and pressure of these rocks is the presence of these bands that are so tightly folded. This rock was very pliable and was able to probably flow a bit like taffy at some point during its history. It's strong and solid right now, but at some point it was very soft and weak. We call rocks that have light and dark bands like this gneiss. The swirling, folded bands give this gneiss its beauty and interest. At another point in these rocks' history, they were intruded by magma or molten rock forming this vein of granite. This granite cross-cuts the surrounding metamorphic layering, showing that the granite is younger than the metamorphic rock into which it intrudes. You can see how the granite picked up chunks of the surrounding metamorphic rocks and moved them along as the granite was intruded. In this boulder, the granite is chock full of chunks of gneiss that had wedged off. Using evidence such as this, it's possible to work out a number of geological events that have affected these very complicated rocks. So we have a number of questions to answer about these rocks. What kind of rock was this before metamorphism? What kind of environment did it represent? What caused the temperature and pressures to occur? Where did all the magma come from? And lastly, when did all this occur? Well, to find out the answer to some of those questions, we have to look at these under the microscope. One way to study these rocks is by using a microscope such as this one. Geologists use special types of microscopes that utilize polarized light that is made to pass through the rock sample and give us properties that we can observe and measure. Polarized light should be familiar to just about everybody because we use them commonly in sunglasses and also in automobile windshields in order to cut down glare. But exactly how does that work? Here's a Polaroid filter sitting on an overhead projector. It doesn't look like it's doing very much except making things a little bit darker in here, but it's actually doing something very special to the light. The light that comes through the filter is vibrating in only one direction, let's say north-south. And when I take a second polarizing filter like this one, so that it only lets through light vibrating east-west, and put the two on top of each other, I really black out all the light. Now that's interesting as far as it goes, but how does that help us to study minerals? Well, if I put a mineral grain in here that's in the way between the two polarizers, and then I put the second polarizer on top of it, I see that the mineral grain lights up. In fact, there's some color effects in here. That's because the mineral is interacting with the polarized light in special ways that are related to the mineral structure and how it's oriented, and this is what helps us to identify the mineral when we look at these things under a petrographic microscope. So this microscope has all sorts of fancy filters and attachments that I can move in and out so I can modify the way polarized light passes through the minerals and see different properties. But the problem is, how do I get a rock like this underneath this microscope? Well, I have to make something called thin sections. To make thin sections, we take a rock of this sort, glue it onto a glass slide, and saw it down and grind it down thin enough so that light can pass through each of the individual mineral grains. That's about 0.03 millimeters thick, which is really pretty thin. So how do we go about doing something like that? This little machine behind me is what we're going to use to make our thin section. When we saw the rock down small enough that we can glue it on this glass slide, it's ready to go into this machine and be cut down further and then ground down to the proper size. Inside this machine is a vacuum chuck, and then in here there is both a little rock saw and a grinding wheel. And by adjusting the position of this, we can cut off most of this rock sample and then grind the rest until it gets to the proper thinness. Well, now that I have my little thin sections made, I'm ready to put them under the microscope and begin to study the rocks.
Here is our banded gneiss. It's made of several different minerals which we can identify. But thin sections also let us see how minerals are intergrown with each other. Here's another view of the same slide, bringing out patterns and colors using different filters in the microscope. Here's another thin section. The colorful mineral is called epidode. Minerals such as these are stable at particular temperatures and pressures, and so they act as little thermometers and barometers in the rocks.
These minerals tell us that our rocks were buried maybe 20 miles down below the surface and heated to temperatures of 500 to 600 degrees Celsius. We also have chemical data telling us that these rocks began life as deep-sea sediments and lava flows that are typical of the seafloor. So we have a bunch of other questions. What's pieces of a seafloor doing in the middle of Wisconsin, and how these rocks get pushed down so far into the earth and then brought back up to the surface where we can find them?
Here's one of the granites. The color is enhanced by filters. Most of the mineral grains you see is feldspar, but there are some small minerals in the rock that can tell us when this rock formed. Some of these minerals will contain radioactive elements that slowly break down at known rates. They can tell us that this higher temperature and pressure event took place somewhere about 1,800 million years ago.
By mapping out the distribution of these rocks, we find them arrayed in a belt across central Wisconsin, which shows part of the extent of this ancient mountain range.
This is called the Central Wisconsin Magmatic Belt, and it's shown outlined here by a couple of black lines. This marks the trace of this deeply eroded mountain range, which we can see exposed from Eau Claire eastward into Michigan. In this map, taken from the Geology of the Lake Superior region by Dr. Jean Labarge, we see what we now call Wisconsin was on two separate continents, shown in yellow, on two separate tectonic plates that were moving toward each other. Ocean rocks are in green and volcanic rocks are in pink. Here's a sequence showing these rocks from the side. First, an ocean and volcanic island arc converging. The ocean rocks are in green, the island arc volcanoes are in pink. Old continental crust is in yellow. The island arc eventually gets crushed into the continent. Here the convergence continues, with the second continent in yellow coming from the right. Finally, they mash together with the two continents meeting and part of the intervening ocean incorporated into the larger continent. Wisconsin is formed. So as these continents collided, the seafloor rocks were buried, squeezed, and uplifted again to form massive mountain ranges. Heat and pressure also partially melted the rocks, forming the granites we see intruding. This is how big mountain ranges like the Alps form. Here are some geologists in the Italian Alps studying rocks very like those we have in Wisconsin. So is this what Wisconsin looked like 1,800 million years ago? That's what the rocks are telling us. Since then, erosion has worn down our mountains to their roots, and younger sediments have buried them. That's what we see exposed in the quarries near Neillsville, a record of these ancient titanic events.
Using rocks like these, we give glimpses into the past history of our state and our planet. And we see time so vast that mountain ranges can rise, be worn down, and covered over, leaving very few remnants of themselves. But the evidence for their existence is in the rocks, and the rocks don't lie.